rain hammered against the windshield of the black sedan as it wound through the narrow mountain roads of the Santa Monica Hills. Inside, Michael Jackson sat in silence, his fedora pulled low over his eyes, watching the storm unleash its fury on the California landscape. It was December 15th, 1987, and the King of Pop was returning from a late-night recording session at Quincy Jones' private studio. The world knew him as the man who had just released Bad, the album that would cement his place in history. But tonight, Michael was simply exhausted, yearning for the solitude of his Neverland ranch. His bodyguard, Marcus Williams, gripped the steering wheel tighter as another flash of lightning illuminated the treacherous curves ahead. "Mr. Jackson, maybe we should pull over until this storm passes," Marcus suggested, his voice cutting through the rhythmic drumming of rain on metal. Michael shook his head slowly. "No, I need to get home. There's something calling me there tonight." His voice carried that familiar softness, but there was an urgency beneath it that Marcus had never heard before. Michael had always been intuitive, almost mystically so, and Marcus had learned to trust those instincts over the years. As they rounded a particularly sharp bend, the headlights suddenly caught something that made Marcus slam on the brakes. There, barely visible through the sheets of rain, was a car that had careened off the road and smashed into a massive oak tree. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, and the driver's door hung open at an unnatural angle. "Stop the car," Michael said immediately, his hand already reaching for the door handle. "Sir, we don't know what we're dealing with here. It could be dangerous," Marcus protested, but Michael was already stepping out into the storm. The rain soaked through Michael's black jacket within seconds, but he didn't seem to notice. He moved with purpose toward the wreckage, his trained dancer's balance keeping him steady on the slippery asphalt. As he approached the vehicle, he could see it was a small blue Honda, probably 20 years old, with rust eating away at the edges. The impact had been severe. The entire front end was accordion folded around the ancient oak. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" Michael called out, raising his voice above the storm. That's when he heard it, a weak cry for help coming from inside the car. Michael peered through the passenger window, and his heart nearly stopped. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was trapped behind the steering wheel. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, and her left leg appeared to be pinned beneath the twisted metal of the dashboard. Her eyes, wide with terror and pain, met his through the rain-streaked glass. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me." Without hesitation, Michael tried the passenger door, but it was jammed shut. He ran around to the driver's side, where the door hung open, its hinges nearly torn away. The smell of gasoline filled his nostrils, and he could see a dark puddle forming beneath the car. This wasn't just about injuries anymore. This was about time running out. "What's your name?" Michael asked gently as he carefully climbed into the driver's seat beside her, glass crunching under his feet. "Sarah," she managed to say. "Sarah Chun. I can't feel my leg." Michael's trained performers, I quickly assessed the situation. Sarah's leg was indeed trapped, but more concerning was the way the steering column had been pushed back toward her chest. Every breath she took seemed labored, and her skin was growing paler by the minute. "Sarah, my name is Michael. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to stay awake and keep talking to me, okay?" She nodded weakly, and Michael could see she was fighting to remain conscious. He called back to Marcus, who had positioned himself near the car with a flashlight. "Call 911 immediately and tell them we have a serious accident with possible internal injuries. Then get the emergency kit from the trunk." As Marcus rushed to make the call, Michael noticed something that made his blood run cold. The gasoline smell was getting stronger, and now he could see actual fuel dripping from the ruptured tank onto the hot engine block. Steam was still rising from the radiator, and any spark could turn this rescue mission into a death trap. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Michael said, his voice calm despite the growing danger. "We're going to have to move fast. The car isn't stable, and there's fuel leaking." Terror flashed in Sarah's eyes. "I can't move my leg. I can't get out." Michael looked at the twisted metal pinning her down. The dashboard had been pushed back so far that conventional rescue tools might not be enough. But there was something else, something that made this moment feel different from anything he had ever experienced. As he looked at Sarah's frightened face, Michael felt a strange sense of destiny, as if every moment of his life had been leading to this exact point in time. The storm raged around them, but inside that damaged car, two strangers were about to embark on a journey that would test the very limits of human courage and compassion. Michael Jackson, the man who had spent his entire life entertaining millions, was about to discover that the most important performance of his career would have an audience of just one. The metallic taste of fear filled Michael's mouth as he assessed Sarah's dire situation. The steering wheel had her pinned against the seat, and the dashboard had collapsed onto her left leg with crushing force. Every second that passed increased the danger as more gasoline pooled beneath the wreckage. "Marcus, where's that ambulance?" Michael shouted over his shoulder while maintaining eye contact with Sarah, trying to keep her focused and calm. "They're saying at least 20 minutes in this storm, sir. The roads are flooding, and they're having trouble getting equipment up the mountain." 20 minutes. Michael knew they didn't have 20 minutes. The acrid smell of leaking fuel was growing stronger, and he could see wisps of vapor rising from the engine compartment. One electrical spark, one hot piece of metal making contact with those fumes, and the entire car would become an inferno. "Sarah, I need to know exactly what hurts and where," Michael said, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. His touch seemed to steady her, and some of the panic left her eyes. "My chest feels tight, like something's pressing on it," she whispered. "And my leg. I can't feel anything below my knee." Michael's heart sank. The steering column was likely compressing her chest cavity, making it difficult for her to breathe properly. The loss of sensation in her leg could mean nerve damage, or worse. But what terrified him most was the way her lips were starting to turn slightly blue, a sign that she wasn't getting enough oxygen. "Tell me about yourself, Sarah. Keep talking to me," Michael encouraged while he carefully examined the twisted metal around her. "What do you do for work?" I'm a teacher," she managed between shallow breaths. "Third grade at Lincoln Elementary. I was driving home from parent-teacher conferences when the storm hit." Michael's hands moved methodically around the wreckage, testing every piece of bent metal, looking for any weakness he could exploit. The passenger door frame was completely crushed, but there might be a way to create enough space to slide her out if he could somehow lift the dashboard even just a few inches. "You must love working with kids," Michael said, remembering his own complicated relationship with childhood and how fiercely he protected young people. "What's the best part about teaching?" Sarah's voice grew a little stronger as she talked about her students. "They see magic in everything. Last week, little Tommy brought me a rock he found because he thought it looked like a dinosaur egg. They believe anything is possible." As Sarah spoke, Michael noticed something crucial. When she talked about her students, her breathing became more regular and the color returned slightly to her cheeks. He needed to keep her mind occupied while he figured out how to free her from this mechanical prison. Marcus appeared at the driver's side door with the emergency kit. "Sir, I've got flares, a first aid kit, and some basic tools, but nothing heavy enough for this kind of damage." Michael studied the wreckage again with fresh eyes. The steering column was held in place by its connection to the steering mechanism beneath the car. If he could somehow disconnect it from below, the column might shift enough to give Sarah room to breathe and possibly free her leg. "Marcus, I need you to crawl under the car and look for the steering linkage. See if there's any way to disconnect it." "Mr. Jackson, that car could shift at any moment, if it moves while you're inside." "Then you better work fast," Michael interrupted, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. As Marcus reluctantly slid under the precariously balanced vehicle, Michael turned his attention back to Sarah. Her breathing was becoming more labored, and he could see she was fighting to stay conscious. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take slow, deep breaths and think about your classroom. Can you describe it to me?" She closed her eyes and tried to breathe more deeply. There are colorful alphabet letters around the walls, and a reading corner with big soft pillows where we gather for story time." "That sounds wonderful. What's your favorite book to read to them?" "Where the Wild Things Are," she said, and for the first time since the accident, she almost smiled. They love acting out the parts where Max tames the monsters. Michael felt a strange connection to that story. The tale of a boy who escapes to a magical world where he has power and control. In many ways, that had been his own story, creating Neverland as his refuge from a world that had often been unkind to him. Found it. Marcus called from beneath the car. But sir, this is bad. The whole front axle is twisted around the steering linkage. I can't disconnect it without hydraulic tools. Michael's mind raced. Traditional rescue methods weren't going to work, and time was running out. The gasoline fumes were getting stronger, and Sarah's condition was deteriorating. He needed to think like the creative problem solver he had always been, the artist who found ways to make the impossible happen on stage. That's when he remembered something from his childhood, a technique his father had taught him when they were working on cars in the garage in Gary, Indiana. It was dangerous and required precise timing, but it might be their only option. Marcus, get back in our car and position it directly behind this wreck. I'm going to need you to push. Push? Sir, that could make everything worse. Not if we do it right. If we can shift the rear of her car just slightly, it might change the angle of the steering column enough to free her. Sarah's eyes widened with fear as she overheard the plan. That sounds incredibly dangerous. Michael took her hand gently. Sarah, I've spent my entire life performing dangerous stunts and taking calculated risks. Trust me when I tell you that I will not let anything happen to you. But we're running out of options, and I need you to be brave for just a little longer. As Marcus moved to position their car, Michael studied the angle and leverage points one more time. This was either going to save Sarah's life or make everything infinitely worse. The storm continued to rage around them, but inside that crumpled Honda, time seemed to stand still as Michael prepared to attempt something that would either be called heroic or catastrophically reckless. Everything depended on the next few minutes, and Michael Jackson, the perfectionist who rehearsed every move until it was flawless, was about to perform the most important improvisation of his life. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he positioned himself in the wreckage, calculating angles and forces like a physicist planning a precision experiment. The gasoline smell had grown overwhelming, and he could hear the ominous dripping of fuel onto hot metal growing faster. Every instinct told him to get out of the car immediately, but Sarah's labored breathing reminded him that leaving wasn't an option. Marcus, I need you to listen very carefully, Michael called out, his voice cutting through the storm. When I give you the signal, I want you to push against the rear bumper, but gently at first. We're trying to shift the weight distribution, not slam into it. Sir, what if the car rolls? What if it catches fire while you're still inside? Michael looked at Sarah, whose skin had taken on an alarming grayish pallor. Her breathing was becoming increasingly shallow, and he could see she was struggling to maintain consciousness. Then you better make sure your timing is perfect. As Marcus took position behind their sedan, Michael turned his full attention to Sarah. I need you to help me with this. When I tell you, I want you to push against the steering wheel with all your strength. We're going to try to create a gap. I don't know if I have any strength left, Sarah whispered, and Michael could hear the defeat creeping into her voice. Yes, you do. You're a teacher, Sarah. You've dealt with difficult situations before. Remember that feeling when you helped a struggling student finally understand something? That moment when you refused to give up on them? Sarah nodded weakly, and Michael saw a spark of determination return to her eyes. That's exactly what we're doing now. We're not giving up. Michael positioned himself to brace against the dashboard while keeping one hand free to signal Marcus. The physics of what they were attempting was incredibly risky. If the car shifted too much, the steering column could crush Sarah completely. If it didn't shift enough, they would have wasted precious time. And if the electrical system sparked during the movement. On my count, Michael shouted. 1, 2, 3. Marcus began applying pressure to the rear of the Honda, while Michael pushed upward against the dashboard with every ounce of strength in his dancer's body. Sarah, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed, pushed against the steering wheel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding screech of twisted metal, the car shifted slightly. The steering column moved upward by perhaps 2 inches, not much, but enough that Sarah gasped as pressure was relieved from her chest. It's working, Michael exclaimed, but his celebration was cut short by a new and terrifying sound. The hiss of escaping steam and the acrid smell of electrical components beginning to overheat. Sarah, we need to move now. Can you feel your leg at all? She tested carefully. A little. There's some sensation, but it's still pinned. Michael examined the space they had created. It wasn't enough to pull her straight out, but if they could rotate her body slightly. Can you turn toward me? We might be able to slide you out at an angle. As Sarah began to maneuver herself in the confined space, Michael heard something that made his blood freeze. The unmistakable crackling sound of electrical wires beginning to short-circuit somewhere in the dashboard. Marcus, we need to hurry. But their attempt to extract Sarah was complicated by a new problem. As she turned, her injured leg caught on a piece of protruding metal, and she cried out in pain. I'm stuck. The metal is cutting into my leg. Michael could see the jagged edge of the twisted dashboard had torn through her jeans and was now digging into her calf. Any movement was causing more injury, but staying put meant certain death if the car caught fire. Making a split-second decision that went against every safety protocol he had ever learned, Michael climbed fully into the driver's seat area with Sarah. The small space meant they were pressed close together, but it gave him better leverage to protect her from the sharp metal edges. Put your arms around my neck, he instructed. I'm going to lift you up and over the obstruction, but I need you to trust me completely. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something that calmed her fear, absolute determination and an unwavering commitment to her safety. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders. Whatever happens, Michael said softly, hold on tight and don't let go. The crackling of electrical shorts was getting louder now, and Michael could see small sparks beginning to dance across the exposed wiring near the radio. They had seconds, not minutes. Using techniques learned from years of performing gravity-defying dance moves, Michael lifted Sarah with a fluid motion that rotated her body away from the sharp metal while supporting her injured leg. For a moment, they seemed suspended in time. Two people locked in an embrace of survival while death lurked mere inches away. Then, with a movement that was part dance, part gymnastics, and part pure adrenaline-fueled determination, Michael carried Sarah through the driver's door opening and out into the storm. They had barely cleared the vehicle when the first real electrical fire sparked to life inside the dashboard. Marcus was there immediately, helping to support Sarah as they moved away from the car. The ambulance! Marcus shouted over the storm. I can see the lights coming up the road. But Michael wasn't paying attention to the approaching emergency vehicles. His focus was entirely on Sarah, who had gone limp in his arms. The effort of the extraction had pushed her body beyond its limits, and she had lost consciousness. Sarah, stay with me, Michael pleaded as he gently lowered her to the ground away from the wreckage. Her pulse was weak but steady, and she was breathing, but barely. As the ambulance arrived and paramedics took over her care, Michael stepped back into the shadows, pulling his hat down over his face. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, and he was suddenly aware of his own injuries, cuts on his hands from the broken glass, a bruise on his ribs from bracing against the dashboard, and burns on his arms from the hot metal. But none of that mattered as he watched the paramedics work to stabilize Sarah. What mattered was that she was alive. The car, now fully engulfed in flames, illuminated the scene with an orange glow that made everything seem surreal. One of the paramedics looked around. Who was the person who got her out? We need to check them for injuries, too. But when they turned to look for the rescuer, Michael Jackson had already melted back into the storm, leaving behind only questions and a mystery that would haunt Sarah Chun for years to come. 3 weeks had passed since the accident, and Michael Jackson sat in his private studio at Neverland Ranch, staring at a newspaper clipping he had read dozens of times. The headline read, "Local Teacher Saved by Good Samaritan in Mountain Rescue." The article was brief, mentioning that Sarah Chun had suffered 3 broken ribs, a fractured leg, and internal bruising, but was expected to make a full recovery. What the article didn't mention, what no one knew except Michael, Marcus, and the medical team, was how close she had come to death that night. Michael folded the clipping carefully and placed it back in his desk drawer alongside something else, a letter that had arrived just that morning. It was addressed simply to the man who saved my life, and had been forwarded through the hospital's patient advocacy department. The letter was written in careful, elementary school teacher handwriting. Dear guardian angel, I don't know who you are, but I know you risked everything to save me that night. The doctors told me that without immediate intervention, I wouldn't have survived. They said whoever pulled me from that car had to have incredible courage, because the vehicle exploded just minutes after I was rescued. I remember your voice, kind and calming, telling me to think about my students and stay strong. I remember feeling safe even in the most terrifying moment of my life. But what haunts me is that I never got to thank you properly. You disappeared before the ambulance even left. I've returned to my classroom now, and every day my third graders ask about the bandage on my leg. When I tell them that a hero saved my life, they want to know everything about you. But I realize I know almost nothing. You were just a voice in the darkness, hands that refused to let me die. If you're reading this somehow, please know that you didn't just save one life that night. You saved all the lives I'll touch as a teacher, all the children I'll help learn to read, all the young minds I'll inspire to believe in heroes, because I met one. Thank you for being my miracle. With endless gratitude. Sarah Chun. Michael set the letter down, with shaking hands. In his 30 years in the spotlight, he had received millions of letters from fans, but none had ever affected him like this one. Sarah's words pierced through all the noise and controversy that surrounded his public life, and touched something deep in his soul, the part of him that had always believed in using his gifts to help others. But her letter also awakened something he had been trying to suppress, the memory of that night and the terrible choice he had made to walk away. Marcus entered the studio quietly, carrying Michael's lunch on a silver tray. He had been Michael's bodyguard for 8 years, and he could read his employer's moods better than anyone. You're thinking about her again, aren't you, sir? Michael nodded without looking up. She wants to thank me, Marcus. She wants to meet the person who saved her life. And you want to meet her too. I can see it in your eyes. How can I? Michael's voice carried a pain that had nothing to do with physical injuries. The moment she sees who I am, everything changes. It becomes about Michael Jackson the celebrity, not about what happened that night between two human beings. Marcus sat down across from his employer, something he rarely did during working hours. Sir, with respect, maybe you're not giving her enough credit. You don't understand. The media would turn it into a circus. They'd question my motives, analyze every detail, turn a simple act of human decency into headlines about publicity stunts or damage control for my image. But there was something else Michael couldn't bring himself to say aloud, something that went deeper than media concerns. That night in the storm, holding Sarah's life in his hands, he had felt more authentically himself than he had in years. No stage makeup, no choreographed moves, no screaming fans. Just two people facing mortality together, and him choosing to risk everything for a stranger. It was the person he had always wanted to be, but rarely had the chance to be in public. Sir, what if she already knows? Michael looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, what if she's figured out who you are but chose not to mention it in the letter? What if she's more concerned with thanking her rescuer than meeting a celebrity? The possibility hadn't occurred to Michael, but now that Marcus had planted the seed, he couldn't shake it. Sarah was intelligent, a teacher who worked with children and would certainly know who Michael Jackson was. Yet her letter was completely free of any reference to his fame or career. She had focused entirely on the human connection they had shared in those terrifying moments. Over the following days, Michael found himself thinking about Sarah constantly. He imagined her back in her classroom, teaching children about courage and kindness. He wondered if she still had nightmares about the accident, if she flinched every time it stormed. Most of all, he wondered if she really was different, someone who could see past a celebrity to the person underneath. The turning point came when Michael received a call from his longtime friend Elizabeth Taylor. She had heard about the rescue through Hollywood's invisible network of whispered secrets and had called to check on him. Darling, Elizabeth said in her distinctive voice, I heard you played hero in a storm. Are you all right? I'm fine, but I can't stop thinking about the woman I helped save. She wants to meet me, to thank me, but you're afraid. I'm afraid of ruining something pure. That night it was the most real I've felt in years, Elizabeth. What if meeting her as Michael Jackson destroys that? There was a long pause before Elizabeth spoke again. Michael, honey, you can't spend your whole life hiding from authentic connections because you're famous. Sometimes you have to take the risk of being hurt in order to experience something beautiful. This woman could become a dear friend, or she could disappoint you. But isn't it worth finding out? After hanging up, Michael sat alone in his studio, surrounded by gold records and awards that suddenly seemed meaningless compared to a teacher's simple thank you letter. He thought about all the times he had sung about healing the world and making it a better place. Here was a chance to do exactly that, on the most personal level possible. But taking that chance would require him to do something he had avoided for most of his adult life. Trust a stranger with not just his identity, but with the vulnerable truth of who he was when no one was watching. The decision he made next would either vindicate his faith in human nature or confirm his deepest fears about the impossibility of genuine connection in his strange, isolated world. The Griffith Observatory sat perched on Mount Hollywood, like an Art Deco jewel against the evening sky. Michael had chosen this location for its symbolic meaning, a place where people came to look beyond themselves, to contemplate the vastness of the universe and their place within it. It was also public enough to be safe, but private enough for an intimate conversation. Michael arrived 30 minutes early, wearing dark sunglasses and a simple black jacket, his distinctive hat replaced by a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He had sent Sarah a letter asking her to meet him here, signed only as, "Your guardian angel from the storm." The letter had included specific instructions: come alone, look for someone feeding pigeons near the East Terrace at 7 o'clock. As the appointed time approached, Michael's hands trembled slightly as he scattered breadcrumbs for the gathering birds. 3 weeks of wondering and worrying had led to this moment. Marcus waited discreetly in a car nearby, ready to intervene if things went badly, but Michael had insisted on handling this meeting alone. At exactly 7 o'clock, Michael saw her. Sarah Chun walked with a slight limp, leaning lightly on a wooden cane, but her posture was straight and determined. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small bouquet of sunflowers, the kind of gesture a teacher would think to bring. Her long black hair caught the golden light of the setting sun, and even from a distance, Michael could see that her eyes were bright with intelligence and curiosity, rather than the trauma he had feared might linger. She approached the area where he stood, but didn't immediately recognize him. This gave Michael a precious few seconds to study her face, to see that she had healed not just physically, but emotionally. There was strength in her expression that hadn't been there during those terrifying moments in the wreckage. "Excuse me," Sarah said politely. "I'm looking for someone who should be here." "Someone who—" She paused, studying Michael's posture and the gentle way he moved among the pigeons. Something about his presence seemed familiar. Michael stood slowly and turned toward her, removing his sunglasses. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Recognition dawned in Sarah's eyes, but it wasn't the starstruck shock he had expected. Instead, her expression shifted through surprise, understanding, and finally, a warm smile that reached her eyes. "It was you," she said simply. "I wondered, especially after I remembered your voice, but I didn't dare assume." "Are you disappointed?" Michael asked quietly, the question containing years of insecurity about whether anyone could value him for who he was rather than what he represented. Sarah shook her head firmly. "Disappointed? The man who saved my life is someone who has spent his whole career bringing joy to millions of people. If anything, it makes perfect sense. You've been rescuing people your entire life. That night, you just did it more literally." Her words were so unexpected, so free from the calculations and ulterior motives he usually encountered, that Michael felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "I've been afraid to meet you," he admitted, "afraid that knowing who I am would change what happened between us that night." "Nothing could change what happened that night," Sarah replied. "You risked your life for a complete stranger. You held my hand and kept me calm when I thought I was going to die. You gave me hope when I had none. That person, the one who wouldn't let me give up, that's who you really are, regardless of your name or fame." They began walking together along the observatory's terrace, the city lights beginning to twinkle below them. Sarah moved carefully because of her injuries, and Michael unconsciously adjusted his pace to match hers. A small kindness that didn't go unnoticed. "The children in my class know you saved me," Sarah said, offering him the sunflowers. "When I told them a hero had rescued their teacher, they immediately started asking if it was Superman or Batman. When I said it was a real person who was braver than any superhero, they decided we should plant a hero garden. These sunflowers are from our classroom windowsill." Michael accepted the flowers with hands that shook slightly. No award, no gold record, no standing ovation had ever moved him as much as this simple gesture from a group of 8-year-olds he had never met. "I don't feel like a hero," he said softly. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Sarah corrected gently. "You did what anyone should have done, but very few people actually would have. Do you know how many cars passed that accident scene before you stopped? 7. I counted them through the pain and terror. 7 people saw a car wrapped around a tree in a storm and kept driving." This revelation hit Michael harder than he had expected. He had assumed that stopping to help was the natural human response, but learning that others had passed by made him realize how rare genuine selflessness truly was. They found a bench overlooking the city and sat together as the sky darkened into full night. Sarah told him about her recovery, about the nightmares that had gradually faded, about the way the experience had changed her perspective on what mattered in life. "I used to worry about such small things," she said. "Whether my lesson plans were perfect, whether parents approved of my teaching methods, whether I was successful enough. But after facing death, I realized that the only thing that really matters is how we treat each other, especially in moments when no one is watching." Michael found himself opening up in ways he rarely did with anyone outside his closest circle. He talked about the isolation that came with fame, about the constant performance required in public, about how that night in the storm had reminded him of why he had wanted to entertain people in the first place. Not for glory or wealth, but to create moments of genuine human connection. "Would you like to meet them?" Sarah asked suddenly. "My students. They've been writing thank you letters to their hero. Terrible spelling, but very sincere sentiments." Michael's first instinct was to decline. Children meant parents. Parents meant publicity. Publicity meant losing the precious privacy of what they had shared. But then he looked at Sarah's hopeful face and realized that she was offering him something incredibly rare. A chance to be appreciated not as Michael Jackson the icon, but as a person who had done something good. "I would like that very much," he said. "But it would have to be private. Just us." "Of course. My classroom after school, perhaps? No cameras, no media, no parents. Just you and 28 third graders who want to say thank you." As they prepared to part ways, Sarah turned to him one final time. "Michael, I want you to know something. That night, when you held my hand and told me to think about my students, you saved more than just my life. You reminded me that there are still people in the world who choose courage over safety, who choose to help rather than walk away. You restored my faith in humanity." Michael felt tears prick his eyes. "You've done the same for me. I was beginning to think that genuine connections were impossible in my world. You've proven me wrong." They embraced briefly. Not the embrace of a celebrity and a fan, but of 2 people who had shared something profound and life-changing. As they separated, Michael realized that the rescue hadn't ended that night on the mountain. It had continued, with each of them saving something essential in the other. The meeting at Griffith Observatory would remain their secret, but its impact would ripple outward in ways neither of them could have imagined. Sarah would return to her classroom with renewed passion, knowing that heroes were real and that ordinary moments could become extraordinary through simple acts of courage. Michael would carry with him the memory of being valued not for his talent or fame, but for his humanity. And somewhere in Hollywood, a story would live on, not in newspapers or magazines, but in the hearts of 2 people who had discovered that sometimes the most important performances happen when no one is watching, and the most meaningful applause comes from a single person saying, "Thank you for not giving up on me." In the years that followed, Michael would visit Sarah's classroom several times, always quietly, always privately. He would watch children learn and grow, remembering what it felt like to believe in magic and possibility. And Sarah would continue teaching, carrying with her the knowledge that heroism wasn't about superpowers or grand gestures. It was about choosing to stay when others would leave, about choosing to risk everything for the life of a stranger. The secret they shared became a foundation upon which both built richer, more meaningful lives, proving that sometimes the most profound connections happen not in the spotlight, but in the darkness of a storm, when two souls recognize the light in each other.